Dad, my daughter-in-law was seen kissing my husband at a roadside motel 3 days before our divorce. I was stirring beef stew when I found out. The pot bubbled quietly. Outside, the Oregon sky turned gray with early November. Inside, from Dad, everything smelled like thyme and betrayal. I cradled the phone between shoulder and ear. Dr. Phillips' voice was low, ashamed even. "I shouldn't be the one telling you this," he said. "But I saw them. It wasn't innocent. I didn't drop the spoon. Didn't scream. Didn't cry. I was with a voicemail, Dad. I just pressed the lid down gently, like sealing a coffin. 3 days left. 3 days till Howard and I would sit across a table, smile politely, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad and end a 42-year marriage with signatures and stale coffee. I'd agreed to the condo, to the pension split, to keeping the cabin, or so I thought, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. But I didn't know then that they, Howard and Jessa, were planning to take everything. The phone call ended. I turned off the burner. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, walked to the window and watched the wind bend the birch tree in the yard. The same tree we planted when Brian was born. Back when Howard called me darlin'. Back when Jessa was still in diapers, if she was even born yet. She's 34. I'm 68. Do the math, dear. My phone buzzed my Aunt Nesto. She'd just steal my marriage. She stole my son's loyalty, my house, my future. I set the table like I always did. 3 plates. Napkins folded, candle lit. From Dad, just a small one. Jessa arrived first, carrying wine. Howard walked in minutes later. He kissed her cheek too close to the mouth. She giggled, I smiled. Poured the wine. Sat across from them. They thought I didn't know. Thought I was too old, too tired, too soft. But soft doesn't mean weak. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and old means I've had time to learn how to wait. Let them laugh, let them lie. I would give them these 3 days, and I would bury them with grace. Would you have spoken up or stayed silent, just long enough to win? The cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was my father's hands. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it was the sound of boots on old pine. It was summers with no air conditioning and love thick in the heat. I was 24 when Daddy handed me the key. Keep it warm. Maggie, he said, his thumb brushing my cheek. You'll need a place that remembers you, even when people forget. Howard loved it once. Or at least, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, he acted like he did. He built the porch swing with Brian when he was 9, painted the shutters forest green to match the lake line. We used to drive up every July, buzz with a voicemail from Dad, packing tuna sandwiches and too much bug spray. That first summer before Brian was born, I burned a pie and cried about it. Howard kissed the flour off my nose and said, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, darlin', this place ain't about perfect, just about peace. He called me darlin' for 19 years. I haven't heard that word in at least 2 decades. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, now he wants to sell the cabin, says it's too much upkeep, who says we're too old to shovel snow and patch roof tiles. The truth is, he wants money. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, wants to cash it in before the ink dries on the divorce. Wants to hand Jessa something I bled for, but he doesn't know the deed's still in my name. Big my lad at my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Daddy made sure of that. He added a clause about bloodline, something even the best lawyer can't untay. I just need to keep my mouth shut a little longer. Last fall, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I spent a week there alone. The air smelled like wood smoke and wet leaves. I found the quilt Mama stitched during chemo. It still held her scent, lavender and mothballs. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I sat by the fireplace drinking cinnamon tea, reading old cards Howard once wrote me, cards I used to keep in a shoebox tied with twine. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, cards that said things like, "You're my only anchor," and "Grow old with me." I did grow old. He just didn't stay to see it. Now that same man tells me, with a voicemail from Dad, with a straight face, that cabin should go. We'll split the proceeds evenly, even after what he did. Even after who he's doing it with. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I didn't answer, didn't blink, just nodded. Let him believe I agreed. Sometimes the only power you have is in what you don't say yet. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it was 1994 when we first brought Brian up to the cabin. He was 8 years old, full of energy and questions, his hair still soft with baby curls. I remember that my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I remember the way he ran ahead, leaving us behind with a trail of laughter, like he owned the whole lake. That first night, Howard and I sat on the porch when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, our feet propped up on the rail, and watched the sunset. It was painted in hues of gold and purple, so close you could almost touch it. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I had never felt more alive, sitting there with him, holding my hand out toward the future. We didn't need anything else, I thought. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, we had everything we needed right here, this moment, in the peace of this place. The next morning, Brian had us both up before sunrise. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, jumping on the bed and begging for pancakes, I made them in the little kitchen, the one where we used to argue over burnt toast. It smelled of maple syrup and fresh air. When Dine buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I couldn't think of anywhere I'd rather be. Howard had a way of making everything feel so simple. He'd sit by the fire with Brian. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, telling him stories about his childhood, stories I never knew, stories that made me fall a little more in love with him every day. But the years wore on, and as they did, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the stories faded, and the laughter grew quieter. By the time Brian turned 16, Howard's work at the school kept him away more often. The cabin began to feel empty. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, like something had been slowly hollowed out, even when we were all there. The thing is, I didn't mind. I loved this place too much to let it go. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, when Howard suggested we sell it 2 years ago, my heart broke right then and there. The place that had held our family's history. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, where we had carved our love into the very wood. It was just another asset to him, a piece of property. But for me, it was more than that. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, this cabin was the only thing left that truly remembered us. It was the last witness to who we used to be. I ran my hand over the smooth surface of the kitchen counter. When my phone buzzed a voicemail from Dad, the very same place I had spilled coffee all those years ago while we laughed about life. Now, I was alone here. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, staring out at the same view that had once held all my hopes for the future, and it seemed like the only thing left to do was to keep it. Whether Howard wanted to or not. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, there's power in what's left behind. This cabin had my fingerprints on it. It had memories in the walls. And it wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Howard pressed again about selling the cabin. He'd been persistent for months now, bringing it up at every family gathering, dropping hints over dinner. I was sipping my lad when my phone with a voicemail from Dad. I could feel his impatience. He'd move forward, but I just couldn't let it go. Not this time. Sa, of course, backed him. She had her own plans, of course. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I didn't even have to ask. She'd already called the movers, trying to organize things behind my back. I wasn't surprised. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she'd always known how to get what she wanted. And it wasn't her cabin. And it wasn't Howard's, either. It belonged to me, to my family. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, to every summer I spent watching Brian grow up on that lake. That night, I sat in the dimly lit living room, a faint breeze flowing through the open window. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I listened to the stillness, the quiet rustle of leaves outside, the same peace that had settled over us when we first arrived here. It occurred to me, right then, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, that this wasn't just about a cabin. It was about control. It was about what Howard had taken from me over the years, what he thought he could take. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and what he assumed he could still control. When he walked in the next evening, looking for a fight, I was ready. I think it's time you understand something, I said calmly. He looked up, his eyes hard. What's that? The cabin stays. I'm not selling. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I'm not asking for your permission. For a moment, he stood there, blinking, his frustration palpable in the silence between us. Jessa wasn't here. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she was off somewhere, probably planning her next move. Howard looked at me as if he didn't recognize the woman sitting in front of him. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the woman who had spent years giving him everything, sacrificing for their family, their future. The woman who had quietly endured his neglect. Well then, from Dad, what do you want, Maggie? He snapped, his voice suddenly low, almost dangerous. I smiled at him, calmly, but with the same quiet resolve I'd learned to master. I want what's mine, and I'm taking it back. Howard scoffed. What's yours? You think this place is yours? I nodded, standing up slowly. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, The walking past him to the window. I'm not just talking about the cabin. I'm talking about everything you think you've taken. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I'm not letting go anymore. I wasn't going to fight him. Not the way he expected. I wasn't going to shout or rage. I had something more powerful, patience. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I'd played the part of the obedient wife for too long. It was time for Howard to learn the power of waiting and of walking away when you finally had enough. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Brian's birthday party was supposed to be a simple affair, just a family gathering, the kind we'd had for years, until things started to change. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the house felt bigger than usual, emptier, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The cake was already sitting on the kitchen counter. When my phone voicemail from Dad, its frosted layers perfectly set, but the joy was missing. Howard was already in the dining room, chatting with Brian about some project he'd been working on at school. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Jessa had taken her place beside him, laughing just a little too loudly at his jokes, a little too eager to please. I slipped into the kitchen. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, setting the salad on the table, my fingers lingering over the old silver serving dishes, those same dishes I had used for every birthday dinner, every holiday gathering. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, for decades, I took a moment to breathe, to ground myself. But when I turned around, Jessa was standing in the doorway, holding a glass of wine, smiling that same false, with a voicemail from Dad. Wide smile that had never sat right with me. Maggie, you look like you've seen a ghost, she said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I didn't say anything, just smiled politely, keeping my distance. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. When my spun the voicemail from Dad, and placed the glass on the counter a little too forcefully. You know, Maggie, she said, her tone shifting slightly. I was sipping my lay when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I just don't understand why you hold on to these old traditions. You don't even have to cook anymore, you know. You can take a break. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, let someone else handle things for a change. Her words felt like a slap in the face, but I didn't react. Instead, I looked down at the salad. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, pretending to arrange the greens, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. She was trying to provoke me, and I could see it now. But I wasn't going to take the bait. Duh. You're right, Jessa, I said quietly, my voice steady. I suppose it's time for new traditions, isn't it? She didn't expect that. She blinked. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Ted, taken aback for a moment, but quickly recovered, giving a tight smile. Oh, I'm sure Brian would love that. Maybe we should just order in next year. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, as she leaned against the counter, as if we were just two friends having a conversation, but I could see the contempt behind her smile. She wasn't my friend. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, not anymore, and that was something I needed her to understand. As the night went on, the party buzzed around me, but I felt like I was standing outside it all. Button buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, watching from a distance. Brian opened his gifts, excited and grateful, but something felt wrong. Every laugh from Howard, every thank you from Jessa. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, felt like a reminder of how far apart we had drifted. Later, when the guests started to leave, I stood by the door, watching Brian say goodbye to his friends. A voicemail from Dad. Jessa passed by me, a little too close, and her voice was soft, almost too quiet to hear. You'll see, Maggie, we'll all be better off soon. I said nothing, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, just smiled. But I wasn't fooled. I knew exactly what she meant. Later that night, after the last guest had left, Howard sat at the kitchen table, his usual spot, mess with a voicemail from Dad, as if everything were normal. But nothing felt normal. I cleared the table slowly, deliberately, not sparing him a glance. The clinking of dishes was louder than usual. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a reminder of the tension hanging between us, thick and uncomfortable. He didn't speak at first, just watched me as I moved around the kitchen. Finally, his voice with a voicemail from Dad. His voice broke the silence. Margaret, what's going on with you? You've been cold all night. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. When my phone buzzed him, Dad, probably expecting some kind of argument, a fight he could win. I didn't give him that. I'm fine, I said, wiping down the counter. Just tired, I guess. He scoffed. Tired? That's it. You didn't even want to talk to Jessa. I mean, come on, she was trying to be nice. You. Nice. I interrupted, my voice steady but firm. I don't think she was being nice, Howard. I think she was being something else. I looked up at him then, meeting his gaze, something else entirely. He raised an eyebrow, his patience clearly thinning. Dad, what's that supposed to mean? I set the towel down on the counter and crossed my arms. It means she crossed a line, Howard. Remember my lad when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and you didn't even notice. I paused, letting the words sink in. You didn't notice when she mocked me, belittled me, right in front of our son. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad and you, I stopped myself, knowing this was the moment where I could either stand my ground or back down, but I wasn't backing down anymore. Not this time. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I don't know why you're protecting her, but you need to understand something. I'm done being the one who stays quiet. One buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I'm done being the one who sacrifices for everyone else. For Howard shifted in his seat, leaning forward. What's this all about, Maggie? My lad, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Are you really gonna let Jessa get in between us? I'm not the one letting anything happen. I snapped. It's not Jessa who's between us, Howard. From Dad. Sis, with a voicemail from Dad, it's you. And it's not just tonight. It's been years of you drifting away, leaving me to pick up the pieces of this family while you. I stopped, with a voicemail from Dad, feeling the anger bubble up. He stood up abruptly. I'm not the enemy here. No, you're not, I said, the words coming out more calmly now, when on my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. But I'm not going to pretend anymore, Howard. I'm not going to keep giving. I've spent too many years doing that, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I'm not doing it anymore. Howard opened his mouth, probably to argue, but I cut him off. You wanted to sell the cabin. I continued, softer now. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dappin. But that's not going to happen. Not as long as I'm breathing. And it's not just about the house. It's about respect. I deserve that. I've earned that. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I'm done being quiet about it, for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Howard exhaled sharply, the fight leaving him as quickly as it had come. From Dad. You're not going to let this go, are you? No, I said, my voice steady. And neither should you. We stood there for a long time, facing each other. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, no more words needed. Finally, I turned away, picking up the final glass to wash, my hands steady despite the tension still hanging thick in the air. Voicemail, Dad, the fight wasn't over. But at least now, I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The following week, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table again, but this time, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the only thing I was focused on was the bank statement in front of me. It wasn't the first time I'd looked over Howard's financials. After all, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I managed most of the bills, the savings, the mortgage payments. But this time, I was looking with purpose. I hadn't expected to find anything out of the ordinary. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I thought maybe I was just overthinking things. But then I saw it, an odd withdrawal from the joint savings account. It was a hefty amount. I let it when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. More than I could justify for any of our regular expenses. It was the date that caught my attention, just days before the divorce papers were filed. And the amount, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, over $20,000. I traced the entry again, squinting at the fine print, but the more I stared at it, the less it made sense. There was no memo, no note. From Dad. Just a name I didn't recognize. A name that seemed entirely too familiar. Jessa. I hadn't thought about it at first. But now, looking at the withdrawal details, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I knew something wasn't right. I hadn't heard Howard mention anything about a personal loan or a big expense. If anything, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, we were just going through the motions of dividing up assets, pretending everything was amicable. But this wasn't part of the plan. I'd with a voicemail in my throat, and dialed Linda Monroe's number, my lawyer. The line clicked, and her calm voice answered. Margaret, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. And what can I do for you? I hesitated for a moment. I need to look into something. I think Howard's been moving money around. For when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, we need to check if there are any other withdrawals. Do you have a specific account in mind? She asked, already sounding like she was preparing to take action. When I phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I passed over the bank statement I had printed out, detailing the withdrawal. Linda was silent for a moment, taking it in. I'll have my assistant get on it. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "Let's also check his credit cards, see if there's anything unusual," I felt my stomach churn as I hung up the phone. For a moment, everything felt surreal. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I'd suspected something for weeks, ever since the way Howard acted in court, so sure he was going to get away with it all. And Jessa, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I knew she had a hand in all of this, just like she had a hand in every decision Howard made now. I set the phone down, my hands shaking slightly. My latte when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but I wasn't scared anymore. I had nothing to lose. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of numbers and calculations, but one thing was clear. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, this wasn't going to be as easy as Howard thought. I wasn't going to let him take everything. Not this time. I sat back, staring at the paper in front of me. The truth was right there, hidden in plain sight. I had all the pieces now. And Howard had no idea what was coming. 2 days later, Linda called me back. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, her voice was calm, but there was an underlying urgency to it. "Margaret, I've gone through the statements you sent me. There are more withdrawals from Dad, not just from the joint accounts. Howard's been dipping into his retirement fund." When my voicemail from Dad and some of those withdrawals matched Jess's name, I felt the blood drain from my face. "Are you serious?" I whispered, my voice shaking. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "How much?" "Enough to raise a red flag. We're talking about tens of thousands, Margaret. I'm not sure what he's planning." When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "But I suspect he's hiding something from you. This goes beyond what we've seen in the divorce settlement." I clenched my fist around the phone. It was with a voicemail from Dad, frustration and rage building in my chest. The audacity of it all. Howard, who'd made promises of fairness and understanding. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, who had led me to believe that this divorce would be amicable. Now, I could see the truth unraveling before me. Linda continued, "We need to act fast." On Lat, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "I'll arrange for a private investigator to dig deeper into these financials. But here's what I want you to do. We need to keep this quiet for now. No confrontations." When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "No public discussions. If we do this right, we'll have everything we need to protect your assets." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "All right, I'm going to pass on the voicemail from Dad. What's the next step?" Next step. "I'll prepare some documentation for you. Meanwhile, I'd like you to start thinking about what you want to do with the cabin." When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "If we can prove Howard is hiding funds and assets, it'll be important to show that you've been trying to protect your share from the beginning." The cabin. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the place I had fought so hard to keep, the place that held all the memories of a life I thought I knew, the place that Howard and Jessa thought they could steal from me. "I'll be ready," I said, my voice firmer now. "I won't let them take it from me. Not without a fight." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the weight of the situation settling over me, I had been patient. I had played the role of the dutiful wife. But that patience was about to pay off. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I wasn't going to let Howard and Jessa walk away with everything. Not this time. Not after everything I'd sacrificed. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I walked over to the window and looked out at the cabin in the distance. The lake shimmered under the fading sunlight, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I felt a wave of determination wash over me. This was mine, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. The days stretched on, but nothing seemed to change. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Howard kept his distance, coming home late every night, barely acknowledging my presence. It was as if we were two strangers sharing the same house. Phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, bound by nothing but habit and empty routines. I spent my days poring over the papers Linda had given me, analyzing every detail, watching the pieces fall into place. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but the more I uncovered, the more the truth hurt. The truth was a heavy burden, one I hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. I had spent years giving, forgiving, Dad. And now here I was, left with nothing but the painful reality of betrayal. The cabin, once our sanctuary, felt colder than ever. I would sit by the window when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and staring out at the lake, my mind spinning with thoughts of what to do next. I had every right to fight back, but something inside me held me in place. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, as if waiting for something, some sign that I wasn't alone in this, that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way out of this nightmare. I thought of calling Brian when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but I knew it wouldn't help. He was busy with his own life, with Jessa. I had no one to turn to, no one but myself. It wasn't the first time I had felt this way. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, this suffocating loneliness. There'd been moments in our marriage, too, when Howard's distance had left me feeling small and invisible. But this was different. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, this wasn't just the loneliness of an empty home, it was the loneliness of truth. The truth that I had spent so many years shielding myself from. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, thinking I could ignore the cracks in our marriage, I couldn't ignore them anymore. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden light across the cabin, if I buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I felt a quiet resolve settle in my chest. I had always prided myself on my strength, on my ability to hold things together, to make things work. But this was different. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, this wasn't about holding it together for someone else. It was about holding it together for me. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, there were a few friends from work, old acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. Maybe it was time to reach out. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad to remind myself that I wasn't entirely alone in the world, I chose one. Ellen, a woman I had worked with when I was still at the hospital. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she'd been a good friend, someone who understood the weight of being a woman in a man's world, the pressures we placed on ourselves. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I hadn't heard from her in months, but today, for the first time in a long time, I needed someone to talk to. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I needed to be reminded that I wasn't just a backdrop in my own life. I sent a quick message of Ellen, it's Maggie. I could really use a friend right now. Lad, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, would you be free for coffee sometime this week? I hit send and waited. The loneliness of truth was unbearable, but maybe it didn't have to be so isolating. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, maybe there was still room for something new, something to hold on to, even if it was just a friend who understood. And maybe, just maybe, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, that could be the beginning of something better. The following day, Ellen called. Her voice was warm like I remembered when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but there was a subtle undertone of concern I hadn't expected. I got your message, Maggie. Coffee sounds perfect. How about tomorrow at that little cafe on 5th? I agreed quickly, my heart lightening just a little, sipping my latte when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. It had been so long since I'd spent time with someone who understood me without question. Ellen had always been the kind of friend who listened, who didn't judge. I was sipping my tea when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and that was exactly what I needed right now. I was drowning in my own thoughts, and maybe, just maybe, talking to someone would help me breathe again. The next day, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I arrived at the cafe early. It was a small, quiet place, tucked between two old buildings in downtown Eugene. I was sipping my latte when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The smell of fresh coffee and baked pastries filled the air as I walked in, and for a moment I felt like I was stepping back into a simpler time. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, when I was just another woman, enjoying a quiet morning, I found a seat by the window, my hands slightly trembling as I wrapped them around my cup of tea. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I had no idea how to begin. Ellen arrived a few minutes later, her presence immediately comforting. She smiled warmly as she slid into the seat across from me. Dad, you look good, Maggie, she said, though her eyes searched my face, seeing more than I was willing to admit. Thank you, I replied softly. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I'm hanging in there. She didn't press further, but her gaze lingered on me, waiting for me to open up. I wasn't sure where to start. Should I tell her everything? About Howard, about Jessa, about the cabin, so not just the voicemail from Dad, or should I just pretend like everything was fine and let this meeting be a brief escape from my reality? Ellen broke the silence. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail, Dad, let me guess, she said with a small smile. You're here because you're tired of pretending. I nodded, relief washing over me. Exactly. What was with a voicemail from Dad? It's just been a lot. More than I thought I could handle. I didn't even realize how much I was holding in. She reached across the table. With a voicemail from Dad, placing her hand on mine, a comforting gesture that felt like a lifeline. You don't have to carry it alone, Maggie. Not anymore. I swallowed. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a blinking back the sudden rush of emotion, I thought I could handle it. But this betrayal, it's eating me up inside. And I'm scared of what comes next. From Dad, of losing everything. Ellen's expression softened. Betrayal cuts deep. I know. But you're stronger than you think. I was sipping my lat when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. You're not defined by what they've done to you. You're still in control of your next step, Maggie. You always have been. Her words settled over me when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a quiet truth I hadn't allowed myself to believe for so long. For years, I had been trying to fix everything for everyone else, even at the cost of my own well-being. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but now, it felt like I was standing at the edge of something new, a choice, a chance to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I smiled through the tears that welled up in my eyes. Thank you, Ellen. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. You're not alone in this, she said firmly, squeezing my hand before releasing it. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I've got more strength than you know, and I'll be every step of the way. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight on my chest ease. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, maybe this was the beginning of something. Maybe it was time to let go of the past and start taking back what was mine. The following weekend, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the family gathered at Howard's suggestion. Brian had invited a few of his friends, and Jessa insisted on hosting a small dinner to celebrate his birthday. When phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it felt like any other evening, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. I arrived early, hoping to prepare the table before the others arrived. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the same worn dishes, the same place settings, the same routine, it should have felt comforting, but instead everything seemed off. Howard was nowhere to be found. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I could hear the faint hum of conversation coming from the living room, where Jessa was already holding court. She was speaking too loudly, then buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, laughing too much, putting on a show, and I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to make herself the center of attention. When she saw me step into the room, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she flashed a smile so wide it almost seemed rehearsed. Margaret, she said, her voice overly cheerful. I'm so glad you could make it. Come, sit down. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, we're just getting started. I nodded and walked toward the table, feeling her eyes on me the entire time. She wasn't being subtle anymore. My lat when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she wanted to humiliate me, and she was going to do it in front of everyone. I could feel the weight of her gaze as I set the salad down and rearranged the forks. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the other guest, mostly Brian's friends, glanced between us awkwardly, unsure of what was happening. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew more strained. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Howard still hadn't arrived, and the conversation had shifted to casual talk of vacations and trips, topics I wasn't in the mood for. Jessa, ever the performer, phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, made sure to comment on every little thing, each remark more cutting than the last. Isn't it funny, Margaret, she said, leaning in too close for comfort. Host with a voicemail from Dad. How some people never seem to know when it's time. To step aside, I didn't respond, keeping my face neutral, but inside a storm was brewing. The truth was, I had nothing left to prove to her, or to Howard, had been patient for far too long. But I wasn't going to let her walk all over me tonight. Not here, not in front of everyone. And then, she took it a step further. She raised her glass, giving everyone at the table a bright smile. Well, she said, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I'm just so thrilled that Howard and I are finally moving forward. I mean, after all, it's only fair. We all deserve happiness, don't we? Her eyes flicked to me, and the subtle implication was clear. I had nothing left. I was just the old, discarded wife. The room went silent. What unbuzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I could feel my heart beat faster in my chest, but I refused to let the anger show. Instead, I stood up, calmly. I turned toward the kitchen, not looking at anyone. When a voicemail from Dad, and went straight for the door. I needed air. Outside, the evening was still and quiet. The cold air bit at my skin, but I felt a small sense of peace. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I wasn't going to let her break me. Not now, not ever again. I stepped back into the house, my breath steady despite the rush of emotions swirling inside. My light when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad Mays. The door could shut behind me, but the tension had already seeped into every corner of the house. I could feel Jess's eyes on me as soon as I re-entered the room. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail for Nov and Dad, a smugness radiating from her that I couldn't ignore. But I wasn't going to let her see how much she had gotten to me. Not tonight. Not ever again. When my phone buzzed mail from Dad, Howard was finally home, standing awkwardly by the kitchen, eyes darting between me and the guests. I caught his eye for a brief moment. When my phone buzzed there, and something flickered there. Guilt. Maybe. But before I could say anything, Jessa chimed in with that same sugary sweet voice. Well, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I think we should all take a moment to appreciate the wonderful meal Margaret's made. You always were so dutiful, Margaret, she said. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, her words dripping with mock sweetness, it was clear she was trying to provoke me in front of everyone, and, for a split second, I wondered if I'd just walk out. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Leave them both there, let them ruin their evening alone. But that wouldn't be justice. Not today. I took a deep breath, my resolve hardening. I walked up to the table. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, taking my seat, my movements slow and deliberate. The air was thick, but I wouldn't let her win. Howard was still standing near the door, unsure of what to do. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but I wasn't going to let him control this conversation any longer. I turned to face him, my voice calm but firm. I'm done with this, Howard, I said. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, my eyes not leaving his. He blinked, his expression confused, as if he had no idea where this was coming from. I was sipping my latte when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but I wasn't going to waste time explaining things he already knew. You and Jessa, you both think you can just take everything from me, but you're wrong. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. This cabin, our home, this life, I've earned every single part of it. And I'm not letting you steal it from me. He opened his mouth to speak. From Dad, but I raised my hand silencing him. I don't want to hear excuses, Howard. Not tonight. Not anymore. Jessa shifted in her seat, but I kept my focus on Howard. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, he looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, but I didn't flinch. I've spent years keeping this family together, cleaning up messes. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, pretending everything was fine while you hid your lies. I was the good wife, the dutiful mother, but I'm not playing that part anymore. I stood up then, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. Now, I'm taking what's mine. And if you think you can walk away with everything after what you've done. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. You're sorely mistaken. The room was silent, everyone frozen, unsure how to react. But I didn't need their approval anymore. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I didn't need Howard to approve of me. I didn't need anyone. I turned to face Jessa, my eyes meeting hers. You may think you've won, but you haven't. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, you'll see, and with that, I walked out of the room, leaving the silence behind me. I was done pretending, done letting them control my life. I was sipping my latte when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I was ready to take back what was mine. The next few days passed in a blur of paper trails and phone calls. I'd handed everything over to Linda, my lawyer, and by now, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she was moving fast. The private investigator she hired had already started digging deeper into Howard's finances, and what I was hearing made my stomach churn. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it wasn't just the mysterious withdrawals or the accounts I had noticed. It was the trail of deception stretching back months, maybe even years. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, every little detail seemed to lead to something bigger, something I hadn't expected. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Howard had been hiding assets, large sums of money that weren't in our joint account. He'd transferred them into accounts under his name alone. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, accounts that I had never seen before, I sat in the living room, the file from Linda spread out in front of me, trying to make sense of the numbers. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, my hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. One withdrawal stood out more than the others. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a payment to a private company, something I couldn't trace back to any legitimate business. The more I looked, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the more everything started to fit together in a way I hadn't anticipated. There was a third account that Howard had opened in a different name entirely. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a name I recognized but hadn't thought of in years, Jess's. It was all there, right in front of me. He had been using this account to funnel money directly to her, even before the divorce papers were filed. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. I should have known, but I had been too blind to see it. All the signs were there. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, just waiting to be connected, I closed the file and stared at the fireplace, the flames dancing in the hearth. It was almost too much to process. How long? My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. How long had this been going on? How deep had their betrayal really gone? I thought back to that night at Brian's birthday dinner, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. To the way Jessa had looked at me, like she knew something I didn't. She had been so smug, so confident. She had no idea I was onto her. And Howard. He must have thought I would just sit back and take it. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not anymore. The next call I made was to Linda, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Her voice was when she answered, and I wasted no time. "It's worse than I thought," I said. My voice steady despite the shock settling deep in my chest. My lat when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "There's a third account, it's Jess's name on it, and it's full of money he's been transferring to her." I paused, taking a deep breath. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "I want to move quickly. We need to file for an injunction to freeze those accounts. I'm not letting them get away with this." Linda was silent for a moment. A voicemail from Dad, and when spoke her voice was filled with the same quiet determination I felt. "We'll act fast, Maggie." When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "I'm glad you found this." I hung up the phone and sat there for a long moment, staring at the file in front of me. I had all the proof I needed now. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the truth was no longer a secret. And soon neither would Howard or Jess's plans be. The following week, Linda called with the news I'd been waiting for. We've got a court date," she said, her tone serious. "I've filed for an injunction. We're freezing those accounts." I exhaled when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a weight lifting off my chest, but there was still a part of me that didn't quite believe it was real. Howard and Jessa had no idea what was coming. Buzz was with a voicemail from Dad. They thought they had everything locked down, but I had them cornered now. When my phone buzzed with a voice from Dad, I spent the days leading up to the court appearance trying to keep busy, organizing old family photos, cleaning out drawers. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I didn't want to dwell on the emotions flooding through me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was past anger. Now, it was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I couldn't shake the images of Howard and Jessa together, their laughter echoing in my mind. It was all so carefully orchestrated, their affair. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, their plan to strip me of everything. But every lie they told, every move they made, had left a trail. And now, that trail was leading straight to them. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Martha the night before the court date, I sat by the fire, the familiar smell of cedar and wood smoke filling the room. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I ran my fingers along the smooth surface of the old coffee table Howard had built when we first moved in. The weight of everything, 42 years of marriage. When it buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and betrayal and loss, pressed down on me. I hadn't asked for any of this, but now that I knew the truth, there was no turning back. I had to see it through. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I had to make sure, no matter what, Howard and Jessa would be held accountable. The next morning, Linda and I walked into the courtroom, the air thick with tension. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Howard and Jessa were together side, heads together, whispering. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes forward, my focus steady. I wasn't here for them anymore. I was here for me. The judge called us to stand, and the proceedings began. Linda was calm. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, her voice confident as she laid out the facts, each withdrawal, each account, each transaction. The evidence was undeniable. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Howard and Jessa had been conspiring to take everything from me. I could see the panic in Howard's eyes as the documents were presented. He tried to argue. When my phone buzzed with him, it tried to claim it was a misunderstanding, but it was clear to everyone in the room that his lies were unraveling. Jessa, sitting next to him, looked furious. When my phone buzzed mail from Dad, her face a mask as a disbelief as the truth came out. Hadn't expected me to fight back. She hadn't expected to be caught. The judge ruled quickly. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the accounts were frozen, and an investigation into the funds would begin immediately. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. As we left the courtroom, Linda turned to me. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. You did good, Maggie, they won't get away with this. I nodded, the smallest of smiles forming on my lips. It wasn't over yet, but it was a start. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the night dragged on, the clock ticking louder than usual in the stillness of the house. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, but sleep was a distant thought. When my phone buzzed with voicemail from Dad, the truth had been exposed, but the battle wasn't over. My mind raced with the next steps, the consequences, the unknowns. I had won this small victory when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. But Howard and Jessa were far from finished, and neither was I. I could hear the occasional creak of the house settling, the wind howling outside, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. But it felt like the whole world had gone silent. It was just me alone in this house I had fought for so long to protect. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and the echoes of decisions I was making that could change everything. My hands were still shaking from the court hearing earlier. But this time, it buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. It wasn't fear, it was something else. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so clear, so focused. For years, from Dad, I had been the one who held everything together. The house, the family, the roles I played. But now I was reclaiming what had always been mine. That's with a voicemail from Dad. It wasn't just about the cabin or the money. It was about my life, my choices, my future. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the images of Howard and Jessa sitting together in that courtroom, so sure they had won, kept flashing in my mind. They thought they were untouchable. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, that they didn't know me. They didn't know what it meant to cross a woman who had been pushed to the edge, who had spent years quietly watching. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, quietly waiting for the right moment. The truth in all its painful clarity had set something inside me alight. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I wasn't the wife who had stood by while her husband strayed. I wasn't the woman who quietly took the hurt and the neglect. I wasn't the victim anymore. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I was the one in control. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows, but it only strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about taking back what was mine. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, this was about showing the world, and Howard, that I would not be dismissed, that my worth wasn't tied to a man's approval or to a family that had abandoned me. When my phone buzzed with a voice from Dad, I sat up in bed, the covers slipping off as I reached for the notebook on the nightstand. I needed to write things down, to focus my thoughts and create a plan. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I couldn't afford to let emotions rule me anymore. I had to be calculated, precise. The pages filled quickly with notes, numbers, names. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a plan was taking shape in front of me, and it was one that would protect what I had built and give me the strength to rebuild what was lost. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, there would be no more hiding in the shadows, no more walking away from my own life. The storm outside raged, but inside I felt a quiet calm. I was ready, and tomorrow, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, everything would change. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The house was quiet, and for a moment, I could almost pretend that everything was normal. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but the weight of what I had to do loomed over me. I stood by the window, watching the first light of dawn stretch across the yard. The lake was still. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. It was the kind of morning that used to feel peaceful before all of this. But today, the calm felt different. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it felt like a new beginning. I was done waiting, done letting Howard control the narrative. I dressed quickly, pulling on a pair of jeans and an old sweater. The phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I wasn't going to sit idly by anymore. I had plans now. Real, solid plans that would change everything. I would protect what was mine. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I would make sure Howard and Jessa couldn't take any more from me. The first step was contacting the bank. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I needed to ensure the accounts Howard and Jessa had opened in secret were locked down. I wasn't just going to let them steal from me. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I'd spent enough years allowing myself to be ignored, dismissed, and taken for granted. That ended today. As I made the call to the bank, I felt a strange calm. I was sipping my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. It wasn't the fear or uncertainty that I had become so familiar with in the past. It was resolve. The woman on the other end of the line was professional. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, her tone sympathetic as I explained the situation. She promised to escalate the matter immediately, assuring me that the accounts would be frozen as soon as possible. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I made sure to get the confirmation number before hanging up, the small victory filling me with a sense of control. The second step was contacting my attorney, Linda. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I needed to ensure that the legal process moved forward swiftly. I couldn't let Howard drag this out any longer. Linda had already been an invaluable ally when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I knew that with her on my side, I was in good hands. I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the quiet of the house surrounding me, sipping my latte when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I thought about the years I'd spent waiting for things to change. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made for a family that didn't appreciate me. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't going to just sit back and let everything slip away. The phone rang just as I finished my coffee. It was Linda. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she was already moving forward with the next steps, preparing for upcoming legal proceedings. "I've spoken with the judge," she said, her voice steady. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "We're pushing for a hearing next week. I've got everything we need, and with the accounts frozen." When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "We'll be in a strong position." I felt a flicker of something inside me, hope, maybe. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking charge of my own fate. A voicemail from Dad. "Thank you, Linda," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Let's do this." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the woman I used to be. Strong, capable, and in control of her own destiny. I was no longer just a victim. I was a fighter. The days that followed felt like a slow burn. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, each one passing in a haze of action and strategy, I wasn't going to make any more impulsive moves. I'd been reactive for far too long. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and waiting for Howard to make the next move, letting Jessa poke at my dignity. But now everything was changing. This time I was the one who was going to dictate the pace. Buzz with a voicemail from Dad. I spent hours reviewing every financial statement, every document I could find in the cabin. The bank accounts, the assets I had built over the years. When my phone buzzed with a voice from Dad, I was just protecting my home. I was protecting my dignity. I was protecting everything I had worked for. By now, Linda and I had already made significant progress. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the accounts had been frozen. The next step was securing the cabin as part of the settlement. But I couldn't just rely on legal paperwork to protect me. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I needed to make sure that every step I took was carefully calculated. I arranged a meeting with a private investigator, someone Linda had recommended. His name was Rix, and he was as no nonsense as they came. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, he had a sharp eye for details and a steady hand in situations like mine, handling people who thought they could get away with hiding things. I trusted him immediately. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, over the next few days, Rick followed Howard and Jessa around, discreetly tracking their movements. I knew they had to be up to something. The more I watched, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the more I realized they were acting like people who had something to hide. They met at odd hours. They spoke in hushed tones. They made decisions without consulting me. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, as if I had no say anymore, Rick gave me his first report, and I could feel the tension in my gut tighten as I read it. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Howard had been making payments to various unknown entities, some of which were linked to shady companies I couldn't trace. And Jessa. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she had opened more accounts, this time in her name alone. The depth of their deception was staggering. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had all the pieces now. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I had proof. And this time they weren't going to get away with it. I walked out onto the back porch, the cool evening air wrapping around me. The lake was quiet. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it surfaced like glass reflecting the orange hues of the setting sun. For a moment, I could almost forget about the mess I was tangled in. From Dad, but then the reality hit me. Again, I couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. I had to be patient, but I also had to be relentless. I took a deep breath. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me, but I didn't feel defeated. I felt focused. I felt in control. The plan was unfolding. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad and I was ready to take the next step, the following days felt like a careful dance. Every move, calculated, every word measured. I had to remain composed. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the plan was already in motion, and I couldn't afford to slip up now. Howard and Jessa were oblivious, thinking they had everything under control. When my phone buzzed were closing in from Dad, but I could feel the shift in the air. The walls were closing in on them, and I was ready to make my move. Linda had arranged for a meeting with a mediator. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, someone who could help move things along in the settlement without dragging things out in court. But a voicemail from Dad, but I wasn't entirely convinced that Howard was going to play by the rules. So, I did my part. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I started reaching out to people from the past. friends who had once worked with Howard. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, people who might know more about his business dealings than he was willing to admit. Rick, the investigator, came back with more information. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Howard had been meeting with a lawyer I hadn't recognized, someone with connections to shady dealings and hidden assets. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Jessa was more involved in his financial moves than I had realized, using her charm and connections to cover his tracks. I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten. The voicemail from Dad, but I refused to let it control me. I had been living in the shadows for far too long. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, now it was my time to step into the light and show Howard and Jessa that they weren't going to get away with this. That night, I sat down with Linda. A voicemail of Dad, my mind focused and my resolve solid. "We have everything we need," Linda said, flipping through the files. "They won't be able to hide much longer." When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "It's just a matter of time before everything comes to light." I nodded, but I knew there was more to do. I couldn't let them think they had the upper hand. Fail from Dad. "We need to make sure they know we're serious," I said. Linda raised an eyebrow, her sharp eyes meeting mine. A phone buzzed with a voicemail from that. "Are you ready for that?" I looked her in the eye, unflinching. "I'm done being passive." When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "It's time to show them that I'm not afraid to take what's mine." The next day, I went to the cabin. I hadn't been there in days, but I needed to see it again. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, to remind myself why this fight mattered, I walked through the familiar rooms, each one filled with memories of better days. The floor creaked under my feet when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and the scent of cedar still lingered in the air. As I stood on the porch looking out at the lake, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I thought about everything I had lost and everything I was about to gain. I wasn't just fighting for the cabin. I was fighting for my peace of mind, my sense of self. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, my ability to walk away from the life I thought I knew and create something new. I turned back to the house, my resolve growing stronger with each step. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the next move was mine to make, and this time I wasn't going to wait for Howard to decide my fate. I was going to take control. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the morning of the court hearing arrived like an inevitable storm. I stood in front of the mirror, straightening my blouse, fixing my hair just enough to look composed. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but not too polished. No, I wasn't here to please anyone anymore. Today, I was here for justice, the justice I'd been denied for so long. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the justice that would reclaim my dignity, my legacy. Howard had no idea what was coming. He still thought he could charm his way out of this. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, that he could manipulate his way to a win. But today, I was the one with the upper hand. I wasn't just a passive participant in my own life anymore. I had control. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I wasn't going to let that slip through my fingers. The courtroom was full when I arrived, the low murmur of conversations filling the space. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Howard was already sitting, talking quietly to his lawyer. Jessa was by his side, her eyes darting nervously around the room, but she quickly fixed a smile as I walked in. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she wasn't expecting what was about to happen, and I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I walked past them, my head held high, and sat down in my seat. I had prepared for this moment. Every document, every detail, every single piece of evidence, the PI's report, the bank statements, the phone records. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, everything was lined up, ready to be presented. Linda, who had been with me every step of the way, gave me a nod of encouragement as she approached. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, her calm confidence settled me even though my heart was pounding in my chest. We were ready. This was the moment I'd been fighting for. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the judge called the proceedings to order, and I forced myself to focus, blocking out everything else. Linda stood and began presenting the case. When my phone buzzed with a clearly voicemail from Dad, speaking clearly and thoroughly, outlining the financial misdeeds, the deceit, and the hidden assets Howard and Jessa had tried to bury. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she went through the bank accounts, the fraudulent withdrawals, the documents I had found, and the lies they had told in an attempt to steal my future. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Howard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face growing redder with every piece of evidence. Jessa, who had sat silently, now looked around nervously. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, her usual confidence faltering. They had no idea what they were up against. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Linda turned to me when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Nodding for me to stand and give my statement, I stood slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. But I was ready. I wasn't the woman I used to be. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I wasn't the quiet, compliant wife anymore. I was a woman who had been pushed to the edge, but had found her strength again. After I've spent my life building something, I began, my voice steady. I gave everything to this family, to this marriage. I sacrificed my dreams, my time, my heart. And I was repaid with betrayal. I paused, letting the words sink in. But I will not allow my legacy to be stolen from me. I will fight for what is mine. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I will not be silenced anymore. I sat back down, the silence in the courtroom deafening. I had said what needed to be said. Now, it was up to the judge to decide. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but I already knew what the outcome would be. Justice was on my side. The silence in the courtroom was palpable as the judge sifted through the papers before him. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it felt like time had slowed, the ticking of the clock in the background louder than anything else. Howard sat next to his lawyer, his face flushed. From Dad. And Jessa, her lips pressed into a thin line, kept her gaze fixed on the table, avoiding my eyes. Linda sat beside me, her hand lightly resting on mine. To my ladder when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a silent reassurance that everything was in motion, that we were on the right path. Finally, the judge looked up, his gaze scanning the room before he spoke. 21 buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. After reviewing the evidence presented and the testimony from both parties, he said, his voice steady, "It is clear that there has been significant financial misconduct, and often a voicemail from Dad and an attempt to defraud Mrs. Lynn of her rightful assets. I hereby rule in favor of Mrs. Margaret Lynn." My heart skipped a beat. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I heard a sharp intake of breath from Howard's side of the room, but I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I wasn't here for him anymore. The judge continued. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, outlining the terms of the ruling, all assets, including the cabin and the retirement funds that had been hidden, were to be returned to me. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Howard's request to divide the marital assets unfairly under the guise of a standard divorce settlement was denied. Jess's involvement was recognized. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and she would not receive any portion of the marital estate, either, I allowed the weight of it to settle in my chest, but I didn't feel the rush of triumph I expected. Phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Instead, I felt relief, a quiet sense of justice. For the first time in months, I could finally breathe again. Howard stood up, face pale, his jaw tight. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His shame was written all over him. Jessa, too, stood up but didn't meet my eyes. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, her hands were clenched tightly in front of her, as if she were holding on to some last thread of control. But it was clear now, she had lost. Phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and there was no coming back from that. As I stood to leave the courtroom, Linda handed me the finalized paperwork. "We did it, Margaret," she said, her voice soft with pride. "You've got what's yours." I nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction wash over me, but it was more than that. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it was a sense of reclaiming everything I had lost, of finally standing tall after years of being overlooked. The courtroom doors opened when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and I stepped out into the bright afternoon light. For the first time in a long while, I felt the warmth of the sun on my face. And when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it wasn't just the end of the trial, it was the end of a chapter in my life I was ready to leave behind. Howard and Jessa had thought they could break me. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, they'd thought they could take everything from me. But they hadn't counted on my strength, and they hadn't counted on the quiet justice I was about to serve. Put a voicemail from Dad. "Thank you, Linda," I whispered as we toward the exit. "Thank you for helping me get my life back." "Maggie. You did it, Maggie. You found your voice." Now, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "It's yours to keep." The days after the ruling felt strange. It was as if I had won something, but the victory tasted bitter in my mouth. The house felt quieter. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, despite the victory I had just claimed, Howard and Jessa were left to face the consequences of their actions, but the damage to my heart, to my sense of trust, fortunately when my phone buzzed with Kunda from Dad, was something that couldn't be undone. I had what was mine, the cabin, the savings, the security, but what about the family I had built? When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Gad, the ties that had once held us all together, those things had unraveled, and no amount of money could sew them back. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Brian didn't speak to me for almost a week after the verdict. I couldn't blame him. Not really, he had always been caught in the middle. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, then torn between his father and me, and now he had to face the truth of everything that had happened. The betrayal wasn't just mine, it was his too. When my phone buzzed with a mail from Dad, and it was a weight that neither of us could carry easily. When he finally came by to see me, it was a quiet, tense meeting. When my buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, he stood at the door for a long moment before walking in. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "I don't know how buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I don't know how we got here, Mom. But I know one thing, I never wanted you to be hurt like this." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, fipping my lad when my fothar bosna, for I just nodded, motioning for him to sit. We both sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging between us. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the echoes of the past few months, Howard's lies, Jess's betrayal, still lingered in the air like a shadow we couldn't quite escape. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry," Brian said after a long pause, his voice breaking. "I didn't know what to believe. It's just been hard, so hard." He wiped his eyes quickly. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but I could see the pain in them. He wasn't just apologizing for the silence, he was apologizing for being caught in the crossfire. I took a deep breath. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, leaning back in my chair. "I know, sweetheart, I know you didn't want any of this. But you have to understand, it wasn't just about the money or the house." A buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "It was about my life, my dignity. I spent so many years giving everything I had, and I couldn't just let them take everything from me." "Not like that." He nodded. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, understanding, and for the first time in a long while I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe we couldn't go back to what we were. Sakafust with a voice banded, but perhaps we could start something new, something built on truth. "Mom, I want to fix things." "I don't know how, but I do," he said, his voice stronger now. "I know, Brian," I said softly, reaching out and taking his hand. "We'll figure it out. Together." The fallout was far from over. And when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, there were still wounds to heal, still so much to rebuild, but in this moment sitting across from my son, I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, maybe that was the first step to healing, learning to lean on each other again. The weeks following the court ruling were a blur of paperwork, phone calls. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, fleeting moments of calm. The fallout was far-reaching, not just in my life but in my family's as well. Howard and I were finally untangled legally. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but emotionally, that was a different story. Brian came around more often, his visits a mix of awkwardness and tentative attempts to rebuild our bond. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I saw the struggle in his eyes. He wanted to support me, but he was also still grieving the loss of the family he thought he knew. I couldn't blame him. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Jessa had been a part of that family too, and now she was gone, and he had to process that as well. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, sorting through some papers, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, when I heard the familiar sound of Brian's truck pulling into the driveway. He knocked softly before entering. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, carrying 2 cups of ifakoi from the cafe we used to visit on Sundays. His face was pensive, and for a moment, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I wasn't sure if he was here to talk or just to keep me company. He placed the cups down on the table and sat opposite me. When my phone buzzed, his fingers tapping nervously against the ceramic. "How's work?" I asked, trying to ease the tension. He shrugged, his eyes distant. "It's fine, just..." When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "A lot going on. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how things used to be." He paused, his gaze meeting mine. "I don't know what to say, Mom," from Dad. "I just don't. I never wanted any of this." I set the papers down and looked at him. "I know, Brian. I know. But you don't need to say anything. We'll figure it out. We're still family." He nodded, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. "I know, but things are different now." When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "I just don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to make it better." I reached across the table and put my hand on his. "We don't have to fix everything, sweetheart. We just need to take it one step at a time. It won't be easy, but we'll get there." I promise. He smiled faintly when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but there was a sadness that lingered in his eyes. I just feel like I've lost so much, not just Jessa, but everything. Spess with a voicemail from Dad. I don't even know where to start. I squeezed his hand gently. I know, Brian, and I'm here, no matter what. We can rebuild this. Maybe not all at once. My lad, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail but we'll do it together. But the rest of the evening passed in comfortable silence. We didn't talk about the divorce or the mess Howard and Jessa had left behind. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad instead, we shared stories from when he was a child, and for a few minutes, it almost felt like things used to be. As he left that night, he hugged me tightly when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and for the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same page. The fallout wasn't over, not by a long shot. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as insurmountable as I had once thought, and maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something even stronger from the pieces. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The cabin was quiet now. I walked through the rooms, each one filled with the memories of years spent with Howard, of summer evenings spent in front of the fire. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad of birthdays and laughter. But as I moved from room to room, it no longer felt like the place I had fought for. It wasn't just a building. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it was a reminder of everything I had endured and everything I had overcome. The walls didn't speak of the past anymore. They held the echoes of a new beginning. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a life that I was finally reclaiming for myself. The house had once felt too big, too full of memories that hurt, but now it felt like a sanctuary. I was sipping my lad when my phone for the voicemail from Dad, a place where I could breathe again. The weight had lifted, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, it was mine to walk. I stood by the window. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, looking out at the lake, the still water reflecting the clear sky. It was a perfect morning, the kind of morning I used to long for in the middle of winter. Now, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it was the beginning of something new. I had made the decision to stay in the cabin. It was mine, after all, legally and emotionally. I wasn't going to let it go. Ken buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. This place wasn't just about what I had lost. It was about what I still had. My strength, my peace. My legacy. Brian had been over a few times since the ruling. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and though things were still strained between us, I could see the shift. We were both healing. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from them, both moving toward something that resembled a new understanding of who we were, apart from Howard and Jessa. I was sipping my lat when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I thought of the condo that had once been part of the settlement, the one I'd agreed to take in the divorce. At first, it had felt like an empty consolation prize. I was sipping my lat when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a place I didn't want. But now I realized it was more than that. It was a space for something new, for women like me who had been cast aside, overlooked, and forgotten. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it was a chance to build something of my own, a place where others could find solace and strength in their own journey of healing. The plan was simple. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, create a safe place, a refuge for women rebuilding their lives after hardship. The walls of that condo would soon be filled with stories, laughter. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and the sound of new beginnings. As I stood there, my hands pressed against the cool glass of the window, I realized that this was my legacy. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, not the things I had lost, not the betrayal or the broken promises, but what I chose to create moving forward. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the legacy wasn't just about passing down material possessions. It was about strength, resilience, and the ability to rise from the ashes of whatever life threw at you. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I wasn't defined by my past, I was defined by what I did next. I picked up my phone and called Linda. We're moving forward with the plans for the condo. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it's time to make it real. As I hung up, I smiled to myself. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. And that, in itself, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, was enough. The condo was no longer just an empty space. It had become something more, something meaningful. I had spent the past few months transforming it, unfuzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but not just into a new home for myself, but into a sanctuary for women like me, women who had been left behind or cast aside. The walls, once cold and barren, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, now echoed with the promise of new beginnings. The living room was cozy now with soft furniture and throw blankets strewn across the couch. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, The kitchen had become my favorite place, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of clinking cups. I had spent hours putting this place together. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail, Dad, carefully choosing each piece of furniture, each small detail that made it feel like home. But more than that, it was a space where healing could happen. Juan buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I knew what it felt like to be forgotten, to be invisible, to be treated like a burden. But this place was going to be different. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it was going to be a haven, a place where women could come together and rebuild their lives, a place where they could find strength in each other's stories. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a place where they could remember that they were worthy of love, respect, and peace. As I looked around the condo, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I thought of the women who would eventually walk through the door, those who had endured betrayal, loss, and hardship, just like I had. I was sipping my latte when mine buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I imagined the conversations we would have, the support we would offer each other. There was a warmth in my chest as I thought about the impact this place could have. Brian, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Brian had come by last week to help me put together a bookshelf for the guest room. He still struggled with the weight of what had happened, but there was a shift in him. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the walls of separation between us were starting to crumble, slowly but surely. I wasn't sure what the future held for us, but I knew that we were both trying. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and that was enough for now. The first woman I invited to stay in the condo was Dianif, an old friend of mine from the hospital. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she had recently gone through a tough divorce and had nowhere else to turn. I offered her a room, a place to start over. The moment she stepped inside, from birth in her, I saw the relief in her eyes. She didn't have to say anything for me to understand. She was home, and so was I. As the weeks passed, voicemail from Dad, the condo began to feel more like the legacy I had always wanted to build. My lat when my phone buzzed with the voicemail Dad, it wasn't just about protecting my assets, it was about creating something that would outlast me, something that would make a difference long after I was gone. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I was leaving behind more than a home. I was leaving behind hope. I was leaving behind the strength to rise again, even after the darkest of times. And that, I realized, was my true legacy.